Step into the unknown with Serenity Valley Stories. Remember to like and subscribe, if you wish to hear more. And now our feature presentation, The Curse Beneath the Waves. It all started when Alex and I arrived in this remote village on the eastern coast of Brazil. We were there for the pristine diving spots. The locals said the coral reef stretched for miles, untouched by mass tourism. It was perfect. Or so we thought. Alex and I had been lifelong friends. Born just a few months apart, we did everything together growing up, fishing, hiking, and eventually diving when we both got certified. This trip was supposed to be the ultimate adventure. Scuba diving, eating exotic food, and soaking up the culture. It was exactly the kind of escape we needed from our mundane jobs back home. Alex had been the one to organize everything, right down to the local guide who'd shown us where the best reefs could be found. It felt like nothing could go wrong. On our second day, we wandered through a small market near the docks, where locals sold trinkets, handmade crafts, and food. The air was rich with the smell of spices and the salty breeze from the ocean. But it wasn't just the bright fabrics or fresh fruit that caught our attention, it was the old woman sitting at a stall covered in strange charms, small bones, and candles. Her eyes seemed to follow us as we approached, her weathered face expressionless. Alex, being Alex, couldn't resist making a comment. "Hey, you sell any magic curses here?" He laughed, leaning over her stall. "Or is this just for show?" I cringed. Something about the woman's presence gave me chills, and his words hung in the air, heavy and awkward. The woman's dark eyes flickered, cold and unreadable. She muttered something in her native tongue, words I didn't understand, but I saw the flash of anger behind them. Before I could say anything, she reached into a pouch, pulled out a handful of some kind of powder, and blew it toward us. It swirled through the air, a fine, silvery mist that stung my eyes and made me cough. "Let's get out of here," I muttered, pulling Alex away. He still laughed, brushing off the moment like it was nothing. But the woman's gaze lingered, and as we left the market, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that day, we geared up for our dive. The village sat near a stretch of rocky coast that dipped into the ocean, and the local diving guide had mentioned a network of underwater caves. He'd also warned us to stay clear of some of them. Rising tides could be dangerous if you didn't know the area. But Alex was always the risk-taker, always pushing the limits. So when we saw a cave entrance below the surface, tucked between jagged cliffs, he gave me that look, the one that said, "Come on, let's do it." I should have said no. I should have insisted we turn around, but I didn't. We swam into the cave, the water dark but calm. The walls were rough stone, narrowing in places but opening up again as we went deeper. Eventually, we found a pocket of air where we could surface. It was a decent-sized chamber, bigger than a small house. The only light came from the pale glow of our underwater lamps, casting eerie shadows across the rock walls. As we looked around the space, we couldn't find any signs that anyone had ever been there before. On the far back wall, we found a small crevice that led into another space. We couldn't fit through with our gear, so we decided to take off our tanks and fins to squeeze through the opening. It was about 15 feet of narrow passageways until it opened back up into an even larger chamber. We spent some time looking at the rock formations and just taking in our surroundings. It was so eerily quiet in this chamber. "This is incredible," Alex said, pulling his mask off and grinning. "We're the first ones to ever be in here, I bet." I nodded, but my excitement had faded. Something felt off, like the air was too still, too heavy. I'm not exactly sure how long we spent in this new cave. I had found several stalactites that looked like they had been forming for centuries. I could see the waterlines on the cave walls that showed during high tide the entrance was completely submerged. This should have concerned me, but at the time I paid little attention to that situation. We continued to explore until Alex was completely out of sight. He must have wandered around one of the corners. I yelled out to him, "Alex, where did you go?" "Over here," Alex's voice echoed from behind a large stone. When I approached, I saw him writing our names and the dates on the wall. I want people to know we were the first in this section of the cave in the future. I just laughed to myself because I knew it was below the high tide marks on the wall and would be erased in a few days' time. We should go, I said. The tide could rise any minute. But Alex waved me off. Relax. We've got time. He was wrong. Minutes later, the water level began to rise faster than it should have. The tide had come in, filling the cave rapidly. We need to get out, I said, panic creeping into my voice. We started to run over to the entrance to the cave. But just as we reached it, a tremor shook the cave, followed by a deafening rumble. The rock above us shifted, and before I knew it, the entrance collapsed in a thunderous crash of stone and water. I turned, my heart pounding, and saw that Alex's leg was trapped under debris. The entrance was blocked by a pile of boulders. Alex was pounding against them, trying to free his leg from under it. His eyes were wide with terror as he tried to shove the rocks aside, but they wouldn't budge. Alex! I shouted, but all I could hear was the sound of rocks grinding against each other and the rush of water. I'm stuck, he screamed, his voice muffled by the sound of water rushing into the space. Get my leg free from these rocks. My mind raced. Our tanks were on the other side of the collapse. I couldn't dig him out with my bare hands, not underwater. I had no tools, nothing. The water continued to rise, pushing me toward the ceiling of the chamber. Alex's was only halfway submerged, but I knew the water would continue to rise well over his head, and I realized that if I didn't get out soon, I would drown too. And then I heard it. A soft clicking sound, like stones being tapped together. It echoed through the water, coming from the darkness below the surface. My blood ran cold. I peered down, shining my light into the water, and saw them. Crabs. Hundreds of them, their legs moving in unison as they crawled up from the depths. Their shells gleamed in the faint light, their pincers snapping hungrily. They were coming for Alex. Alex! Get out of the water! I shouted, but it was too late. The crabs were already swarming around his legs, climbing onto him, their sharp pincers tearing at his wetsuit. He screamed, thrashing against the rocks, but there was nowhere for him to go. I watched in horror as they overwhelmed him. His screams turned to gurgles as the crabs tore at his flesh, their pincers digging into his skin. Blood stained the water, swirling in dark clouds around his body as the crabs fed, their clicking growing louder, more frantic. Help me, he screamed, his voice barely audible through the chaos. But I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. My own breath was coming in ragged gasps, and I realized the water level had risen even higher, leaving me with only a few inches of air above my head. I had to get out. I had to survive. With one last, desperate glance at Alex, his body now covered in crabs, his struggles weakening, I dove down, swimming toward the pile of rocks. There was a small gap near the bottom, just large enough for me to squeeze through. I pushed myself through it, feeling the sharp edges of the rock scrape against my skin, and surfaced on the other side. The water was still rising, but I was free. Gasping for breath, I pulled myself onto a ledge and looked back into the cave. The crabs had finished with Alex. His body floated limply in the water, barely recognizable, shredded by the relentless crabs that had swarmed over him. I couldn't stay. The tide was still coming in, and if I didn't move, I'd be trapped too. I grabbed one of the scuba tanks, strapped it on, and dove back into the water. I swam as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my ears, my lungs burning as I pushed myself. I didn't stop until I reached open water, the bright sunlight blinding me as I broke through the surface. I don't remember how I made it back to the village. I don't remember the questions from the locals or the look of horror on the diving guide's face when I told him what had happened. All I remember is the priestess's eyes as she watched us walk away from the market, her curse hanging in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Alex never believed in that kind of thing. He always laughed it off, thinking it was just superstition, just a joke. But I know better now. There are things in this world we shouldn't mock, things we shouldn't disturb. And I'll carry the weight of that knowledge, and the memory of his screams, for the rest of my life. Thank you for watching Serenity Valley Stories. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another scary tale. Share your thoughts in the comments below.